All yours.
Okay, so I guess we just switch the view to my hands. I'll go ahead and get started.
I'm going to hop in here before Darren gets started. Hi, I'm Claire. I'll be hanging out in the chat and answering your questions. So if you do have any questions, please type them in the chat and then I can answer them there or forward them to Darren. I'll also be popping the patterns in the chat if you didn't get those and need to download them. But all right, now Darren, take it away.
All right, so the first pattern we're going to review today is a free pattern on lionbrand.com. And it's called the Fisherman's Crochet Hat. And this pattern calls for homespun yarn, Montana Sky. And that's what I have here. And I'm
Darren,
with this.
Can you talk to the computer and not to the yarn?
So I'm going to be demonstrating with this one, and it's available on lionbrand.com. So what we need is not too much for this one. We need the yarn. We need a crochet hook, a K10, which is a 6.5 millimeter. And we just need large red blunt needles for weaving in our ends. We're not going to worry about the gauge for a hat. It's not such a big deal. So this hat is worked in a flat rectangle, and then we sew it together to make it into a hat. So what it's telling us is leaving a long tail, chain 53. So I'll demonstrate that for you. So a slip knot is the way to start. And for crochet, it's a little specific. You want to make sure you're tying the slip knot so that your tail controls the knot. So you can pull it closed, pull it tight. So the way I like to do that, you lay your yarn down. So this is my working yarn. This is the long. And then this is my tail that I'm going to be weaving in at the end. So this is the short tail. So we've got short over long. And then you just reach under the loop and grab it like that. And what you want to make sure is that when you pull the tail, that's what controls it. So lay your yarn down, take your yarn tail over your working yarn, so the short over the long, and then reach under, hold on to your tail, and bring that back through. Now there are so many different ways of tying a slip knot. So if you do it a different way, it's fine. But what you really want to try for crochet is to make sure the tail is controlling the knot. Okay. So for chaining, you just yarn over the hook, pull it through. So yarn over. Now I'm not going to chain all of it. I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit. So I don't know what level of beginner we have in the group, but just a little review of how to do things. So any questions on chaining or the slip knot? Good?
No questions on that, Darren, but we're still having sound issues. I think it's when you're looking down and talking that it gets a little garbled. I know you need to look at what you're doing, but hopefully we can work this out.
All right, I pulled it a little closer, so hopefully that'll help.
Well, it sounds much better to me. Hopefully it's good for everybody in chat.
So after you do your chain, so pretend I chained 53. You don't want to sit here and watch me chain 53. We're going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook, and then in each chain all the way across. So that's not so hard to start the hat. So the loop that's on your hook never counts. So you don't count that. And so there's the first one. So I'm going to go in the second one, yarn over, pull it through. I have 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, and then pull it through both. That's a single crochet. Yarn over, pull it through, yarn over, and then pull it through both. Okay, any questions about a single crochet? I always try to do a half double because that's my favorite stitch. So I have to catch myself. Just want to show you one thing when you get to the end. So when you get to the end, you finish it, and then you chain up one, you chain one, and that's giving you the edge. And then you'll start into it again. So if nobody has any questions about single crochet, we'll go ahead on to a few other things. So I have this hat here pretty much finished. So we can go ahead and move along. So chain 53, so here's my bottom chain right along here. And then I worked all my single crochet. And what you end up with is this rectangle here. It's folded in half. So any questions about how I got to this point? Does that make sense? Okay. So once it's just making a rectangle. So for this hat, it's very easy. You just crochet a flat rectangle. You don't have to do any increases or decreases. And so you're going to continue until the hat measures about 11 inches. And then what it wants us to do is to leave a very long tail, because we're going to use that for finishing. So I've threaded my yarn tail onto a large-eyed blunt needle, like that. And then all you're going to do is you're going to weave this in and out the top edge of your hat, like this. And then we're going to draw that up tight, like a drawstring on a change purse or something. So you can see I'm just kind of going through that top loop. And if you get off track a little bit, it's not a big deal. Just pull it through.
Darren, after you stick this needle through the next couple times, can you pause and move your hand so we can all see it?
Right here? Oh, see the hat?
No, see how you're threading through the top.
Okay. Okay. So this is the top edge of the hat. And I'm just going in this right here. So if you were going to make a crochet, you would go through there. So I'm just going through the same place you would go through if you were going to make a crochet. And I'm just weaving it just in and out. What's there? Okay, and then we'll just get to the end. Just pull it tight, pulling it until it's tight. And then what it looks like on the top, you'll just gather it up. And then you do want to secure it to the other side. So just kind of take it to the other side. Put that through. Oops, I've got my other yarn all caught up in it. Try to only work with one ball yarn at a time. So pull that through and secure it. What you'd want to do here is tie a knot, just kind of with your needle, like go through and make a knot, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to undo this later to use this for demonstrations again. But you do want to secure it very tight right here because you want that to stay closed. You don't want it to open up. So just take your needle through there, tie a tight knot so that it won't come open. And then we're going to seam this hat. So we're going to use this long tail to seam it. And you always want to try to go in a straight line. So once you start, you want to make sure you're establishing it always So I'm going to do the whip stitch. I think that's what I'm going to do for this one. And so the edge of the crochet is a little uneven. It doesn't give you a perfect place to go in because it's the way it's constructed. So you have this one, and then that looks a little different. So it kind of alternates between these. So you just want to make sure that you're always going the same space apart and that you're going the same depth. And that'll make your seam look really nice. So, and you don't want to go too deep. You just want to pick up those stitches right along the edge. And then you just whip stitch this together. Just like that. Any questions about seaming the hat? You don't want to pull your seam too tight or else it'll make it pucker, but you do want it to be nice and snug. Okay, so you would continue on like that. And what you end up with is a seam that looks like this. And that's your hat finished. And then you just weave in your ends and you're done. So that's the easiest one for beginners. So if you don't really know, if you haven't been crocheting very long, then this is a really good one to start if you want to learn how to make a hat. Okay. Any questions about any of those, any of that?
Pat wants to know, will the whip stitch leave a lumpy seam when you're wearing it?
It does, because the yarn's bulky, it does leave a bulky seam, but it doesn't really seem to show up when you're wearing it. So, you know, just make sure that you're not going so deep. Make sure you're going just right along that very edge to kind of keep the seam as narrow as possible.
And then a couple more questions here. Jean wanted to know, what tail did you use for seaming? Is that the tail from the slip knot?
You could actually do either. You could just leave a really long tail when you start and use that one for seaming, but I usually use the one at the end because I find it easier than dragging like a 20-inch long tail behind me while I'm working on my hat, and there's always a chance you might crochet with the tail by mistake. So I like to use the one at the end, but either one would work fine, depending on what you want to do.
And what size hook for that pattern again?
Oh, sorry. So this one is 6.5 millimeter, which is a K.
I think we are all set to move on.
Okay, so this one's a little different, a few more things to learn. This one's also free on Lion Brand. And this one is calling for a yarn called Tweed Stripes. Now the thing about Tweed Stripes is it's discontinued. So this is the first thing I want you to know, to learn, is just because a yarn's discontinued does not mean that you have to disregard the pattern. So if you look Tweed Stripes up on in Google, you'll find that it is a number 5 or a bulky weight yarn. And so it makes it pretty good for, we can use, you want to look for this number, and we can use this homespun if we want to. The hat that I used, or the yarn that I used actually, was Color Made Easy when I first made this for my class. So this is also available on lionbrand.com. And this one is on michaels.com or lionbrand.com. Okay. So this is calling for three balls of Tweed Stripes Caribbean, but we're not going to need that much because this actually is for a hat and a scarf set. So one ball of yarn should do for a hat. We need a crochet hook, a K, which is a 6.5 millimeter, large-eyed blunt needles for weaving in the ends, and that's it. So we don't need a lot for this hat either, which makes it nice. So the first thing, it wants us to chain 26. So we already reviewed how to chain. So you would just chain 26. And so I've got a little sample that I started here for my demonstration. It wants us to single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each chain across. So that's pretty simple. So we already reviewed that. We don't have to go over that again. And now what it wants us to do is chain 1, and it wants us to work through the back loops only. So I don't know if you've ever worked through the back loops, but what we're going to do is we're going to do a single crochet all the way across, but we're only working through the back loop. Let me show you how that looks. All right. So normally when you do a crochet, you would go through here. And you've got those 2 loops, and it looks kind of like a V shape. But if we're going to go through the back loop only, you want to go through here. So it might seem a little different, because it is different if you've never done it. So it might be a little weird at first. But just take your time and make sure you watch what you're doing, and it'll be fine. And some patterns will have you go through the front loop. And that's the same. I'll show you that just so you know. If you want to go through just the front loop, it would be through there. But for this pattern, it's through the back loop. Any questions about going through the back loop? Now what that does, that gives us a new texture for our fabric. So instead of having the same old texture, it creates this, which looks like ribbing. So it gives us this nice, nice kind of ribbing kind of texture. All right. Any questions? So we did our chain here, and then we worked through the back loop only using single crochet all the way up. That's how we made this piece. And it wants us to repeat row 2, which is just working through the back loop until the piece measures about 19 inches from the beginning. If you're making it for somebody that has a very large head or a very small head, you can change that measurement. So you can make it larger or smaller as needed. And then it wants us to fasten off, leaving a long tail. And we're going to finish this hat pretty much the same as we did the other one. So you would take your yarn and thread it through. So this hat, actually, this sample piece, I didn't have the right yarn. I had a worsted weight yarn. So what I used, this is Pound of Love, which is also available on Michael's and at Lion Brand. So I used 3 strands of a worsted weight to give me the right size yarn, because I ran out. So again, you would just kind of go through this edge, kind of like we did before. It's going to look a little different because we made it in a different way. You don't have to be so fussy about how you do it, really. Just try to make it neat, keep them about the same distance apart. And then when you seam it, you want to hold these together. Now, a little bit about seaming. Because knitted and crocheted fabric are very stretchy, it's a good idea to get some clips, and you can put a clip here in the middle and a clip here on the end. Because what happens is you could stretch your fabric when you get to the end of your seam. You're going along and everything seems fine. But when you get to the end, it's like that, and it's not lined up because you can stretch it by mistake. So if you put a clip to hold it in place, that might help avoid kind of an upsetting situation later. So now this one, I'm going to show you another seaming technique. I like to use the running stitch. Now we created this hat a little bit in a different direction. So we created our chain on this side, and then we went this way, and that's what's giving us the line going up and down. And we're going to fold it in half, And so instead of working in the edge of our crochet, like we had to on this one for our seam, on this one, we get to work in the chain that we made at the beginning, and then the last row of our single crochets here. And that gives us a very, very nice edge to kind of work into and make your seaming a little bit easier. So first thing you would do would be to gather the hat like that. I don't want to do that to this one because I want to use this one as a display again. And I don't want to bore you to death as you watch.
Darren, one question. You mentioned a clip to hold the edges together when you're seaming. What kind of a clip are you talking about? Like a chip clip or a paper clip or a...
Okay, you can use, it's more like a chip clip, like something you would use to close like a bag of potato chips. You can use those. You could use, they make special ones for knitting and quilting that I like to use that hold very tight. But for a small seam like this, you wouldn't have to, you know, a chip clip or anything like that. If you don't use a clip, you just want to stop every so often and make sure things are lining up right. Like you don't want to wait until you get to the end. So, or you can just tie a piece, you can tack it down with a piece of yarn. You can tie it there and tie it here and then remove that yarn when you come to it. Either way is fine. Okay, any questions?
We've got some questions on some unrelated things, but for this hat, I think we're okay.
Okay, so let me show you the seaming technique. This is the running stitch. And you want to go through, right through there. And then on this side, so this is a little easier because the chain edge and the last row of your single crochet gives it a nice, really nice clean edge to work into. And then come back from the other side. So the whip stitch, we came through the same side. We always jumped over and came through the same side. But for the running stitch, you go through one side and now I prefer the running stitch. That's usually what I do when I seam. I'm not sure why. I feel like it gives a nicer seam. Other people, I've heard people say that the whip stitch gives a much nicer seam and the running stitch is not a good idea. So it really just depends on what you like. So you just go through there. So you can see I'm just going under that stitch. You don't want to go too deep because your seam will be very bulky. And if your stitches are spaced out, so this helps us space our stitches out. If you go right through there, each one of those places, so we'll always be the same depth and we'll always have our stitches spaced the same distance. And it'll give us a very, very neat seam. Okay. And so if you do get to the end of your seam and you turn your hat right side out and it doesn't look good, the good news is it's very easy to take the seam out and try again. So you don't have to have anxiety if this is the first time you've ever seamed. All right, any questions about this hat? And then here's the finished hat, a different one. So with this one, I changed color halfway through because mainly because I ran out of yarn. But it gives it a nice effect. It's a half and half. So you can do different things like that. You could do stripes, but this is the way the hat looks when it's finished. And this is the way my seam looks.
Yes, speaking about the seam, Darren, did you seam it with the hat inside out or right side out?
You always, with this seam, you put right sides together. But with this type of fabric, it's reversible. So it's the same on both sides. So it doesn't really matter. But you can look at it before you seam it and see if one side looks nicer than the other one. Maybe you made a mistake on one side. And then now that's the inside because you can hide it like that.
And I just wanted to say as a reminder too, I'll pop it in the chat here, that since this class is being recorded, it'll be available on michaels.com/classes tomorrow for you to watch at your pleasure. You can stop and rewind as need be. So don't forget to do that if you need.
Okay, so here's what the seam looks like. It's easy to tell because it's two separate colors. So not such a bulk. And because of the ribbing, it kind of blends right in. Like I almost couldn't even find it at first. So if you're worried about the seam being too bulky and showing when you wear the hat, this is a good choice for that. It'll help hide it in the texture. All right, so we're making very good time. Not a lot of questions on this group. We might. I always say we're going to finish early and then we run over, so probably not. All right, so this one is constructed a little bit different, and so we have something new we get to learn. And let's look at that pattern. Again, it's a free pattern on Lion Brand. And pretty much need the same thing for all of them. This one's called for another discontinued yarn, but that's not going to stop us. We just need the crochet hook and a large-eyed blunt needle to get started. And this one is constructed a little different. So you make the hat band first. So you chain 8. And what you end up doing is you chain 8 along this edge. And then you're working again through the back loop only.
Darren, sorry,
Yes.
We're having sound issues again. I think it's when you look down and hold the pattern, it gets between you and the microphone.
Okay. All right, I'll try to do better. So when you do the chain, and then we're going to work single crochet in the back loop only, the same way we did on the previous hat. So once you've learned that, you're ready to move on to the next one. And you can see it gives it a very nice kind of stretchy ribbing edge, which kind of looks almost like knitting, which makes it nice for the edge of a hat. So that's how we start. And so we have the hat band, and we continue working in the back loops only, single crochet in each one across until the piece measures 19 inches. And again, if you want to make it a little bigger or a little smaller to accommodate whoever you're making it for, this is when you would decide that. And hold the first and the last row together with the stitches matching, and then we're going to join it. We're going to chain 1, turn. Let me just show you. It's easier to show you. So you want to, kind of like when we were seaming, you want to make sure that they're matching up very nice. Let me get this quiet for now. Make sure that they're matching up. And again, you could put a little clip there if you wanted to. It's probably not quite so necessary on such a small seam. And then, oh, no, we're not using that. I was going to use I was thinking I was going to use a large-eyed blunt needle to sew it, but what it wants us to do is to crochet it together. So that way you wouldn't have to cut your yarn. You would leave this is cut because it's just a display, it's a sample, but you would leave your working yarn attached to your ball of yarn. You wouldn't have to cut it, and that gives you one less end to weave in later, which nobody likes to do that. So with this, you just want to make sure you're going through the edge to give it a nice corner. And then we're just going to slip stitch that together. And then again, we can go through there. We can let that guide us as to where our seam should be. And then we pull it through and pull it through. I'm using 2 strands together, so don't leave anything behind. And you would just do this all the way up. Any questions about how to crochet this together with just a slip stitch? So you've learned 3 seaming techniques today. almost finished.
While you're joining those ends, Darren, we've got a couple questions. You have to measure this. Now, would you recommend measuring it with the brim stretched out?
Well, you don't want to stretch it. When you're measuring it, you want to lay it down, and you want to let it rest for a minute, because if you've been like fussing with it and saying, I wonder if it's right or not, then you might have stretched it by mistake. So whenever you're measuring anything knitted or crocheted, you want to lay it down flat, let it rest for a minute to kind of resume its original shape, and then you just measure it. So, but I've already seamed this, so we can't double check. But does that answer the question?
Yeah. And to clarify, yes, this is the brim of the hat. So this will go around your forehead. And then Andrea had a question on, is a slip stitch to seam like a single crochet to seam?
No, a slip stitch, let me show you the difference. So a single crochet is, you go through, yarn over, bring it through, yarn over, bring it through. That's a single crochet. It gives it a little bit, the stitch is a little bit taller, so you have this post right here. And a slip stitch is, you just go through, you bring it through, and then you bring it through both. And you certainly could use the single crochet to seam it if you want to, but it is going to give a bulkier seam. It's going to give a little bit extra on that seam, and you might not want that. So you can try it, and if you don't like it, you can take it out and try it a different way. Okay, does that answer that question?
Yep. And then maybe when you get to this next part, could you show us if you wanted to do the top of the hat in a different color, how would you change colors?
Okay.
If we want to make it fancy.
I've got a different color here, but it's thicker yarn, but just pretend it's the same. It doesn't make much difference. Okay, so that affects the way we end it. So we go through here, and we go through here. And then I would start my new color now. Pull the new color through, and then chain one, and then that brings it up so that you don't want this first stitch to be blue. So that's where I would change color. You don't have to. You could, if this part confuses you, you could knit or crochet the first round of this hat in the blue and then change it at that point. So don't let that confuse you if it does. It's a good idea to mark the beginning of your work. And I usually don't worry about it because of wherever the tail is, that's the beginning. You can usually keep track that way, but it's nice to have a stitch marker. You put the stitch marker right there, right on your stitch. And so we're gonna have to pick up stitches all along the edge of this band. So let's see what it's telling us to do.
Before we get there, Darren, can you just show the difference between a slip stitch and a single crochet one more time?
Okay. So a slip stitch. So here's where we're gonna do our work. So a slip stitch, you go through, yarn over, bring it back through. You have 2 loops on your hook, and you bring it through. You go through. You have 2 loops. Now you have 1. So a single crochet is you go through. So if we were doing a slip knot, now we would finish, but it has an extra step. You yarn over and then bring it through both. And that creates this post, which gives it a little bit more oomph. Makes it a little taller. And let me show you a half double while we're here, because we're gonna do half double on the hat. So the half double is my favorite stitch. I really like it. And this one, you yarn over first. So you start with the yarn over, and then you go through, yarn over, bring it up, yarn over, bring it through all 3. So yarn over first, go through, bring it through 3. Any questions about any of those? We've got the slip. You can see here, you can see how most of my other lines seem to be going pretty straight. You can see how this one, see how it curves up? So I started with the slip stitch, which is a very short stitch. It really doesn't add much to your work. And then we did a couple single crochets, which are a little bit taller. And then with the half double, they're even taller. So you can kind of see the difference it makes a difference in your work. So any questions about any of those?
Well, LJ wants to know why half double is your favorite.
It's a little bit more flexible than single crochet, and double I find to be a little bit more open than what I usually want. So half double, the fabric is flexible and warm, but it's not too open though. So that's why I like it. And there's something about the rhythm of it. I just get into that rhythm of the half double. It seems like I can crochet really fast when I do that. So, but it really depends on the project. So whatever project you're doing, you have to decide which, if you're designing it yourself, if you're following a pattern, of course, the designer would have already thought of that for you. All right. So now we're going to pick up the stitches along the edge of our brim. So we're going to start the body of the hat right here, working in the ends of the rows across the long side of the band. We're going to work 48 stitches evenly spaced around, and we're going to join with a slip stitch at the first stitch. All right, so we're going to have to pick up 48 stitches all the way around, and you want to make sure you're spacing these out evenly. So that marks our beginning. And you can measure it and get very scientific if you want, but this will mark my halfway point. And then put one here. That marks 1/4. And this marks 3/4. And then you just space it out. So you don't want to end up like you go all the way across here and you have 35 stitches on this side, and then you don't have, you're going to have to space the other ones out too far. Or if you get all the way across and then you only have maybe do 20, then you realize, okay, I have to divide them in half. So that, you put half, it was 48, so you put 24 on each one, and half of 24 is 12. Right? I'm not good at math. So each one of these should have 12 if my calculation is correct. And so actually, I want to tell you this. This is a little trick that I like to do. If we were going to change color here, what I would do, I would actually crochet the first round in the blue. And I'll tell you why. This edge it's not an even edge, especially because of our ribbing. It really exaggerates how uneven it is. And if we do the first row in blue, it's going to be much neater. So let me, even if you try really hard to keep them the same length, they always tend to look a little messy to me. So see how that one's up higher. See, they don't look straight. They don't look, I wouldn't be happy with that, but I get a little fussy about things sometimes. But if you did this in blue, if you did this in the exact same color that you made the band in, it wouldn't matter if it were a little bit up or a little bit down because it's the same color, you wouldn't see it. Now let's say we did the whole, we added our 48 stitches all the way around, but we did it in the blue instead of this cream color. Now on the second round, it gives us a beautiful edge to go right into. So, you know, you go through there each time, and that way your stitches will all be spaced out the same, and they'll all be the same distance, the same depth, and it'll give you a much nicer seam. So that's just what I like. If you don't like it, then that's fine. But I think it gives it a much nice. Anytime you have to crochet into the edge of a crocheted piece, it's a smart tip to do it in the same color that you created that piece in. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So just get back where I needed to be. Okay. So after you seam the hat, so I'm going to demonstrate on this, like this little tube so that you don't have to watch me go all the way around. 48 stitches. So we're doing half double. So I'm still having a hard time learning how to watch my hands through the camera and crochet and not looking at my real hands. So it's kind of a hard thing to do if you've never tried it. I'm just doing this quickly because I want to show you how to get to the edge. Because we're not working in a spiral, we're working in rounds. And I want to show you how to join that. You get to the edge. So if I were making a real piece, I would be a little bit more careful where I was putting my stitches. Just trying to get around as fast as I can. All right, so we did all our 48 stitches all the way around. And you can see if we wanted to change color, then that would be the perfect time because it makes it much easier to give us a nice edge. And then we're going to join it with a slip stitch. So we go right through there. And I'm going to show you another tip to make it easier. So we join it with our slip stitch. And then we chain one to create the height of our stitch. Now it's a smart idea. I even like to do this to help keep track because sometimes you're not sure. Go ahead and put a stitch marker there so you know where that stitch is. It makes it a lot easier to find it later. So we do a half double. Any questions about any of that? No, it probably looked really confusing because I'm working on this sample piece. And then you just continue with your half double. So if there are no questions, we can move on to the next bit.
Karen did have a question as to what happens at the seam while you are crocheting around. I'm not quite sure what she's asking about though.
I think I know what she means.
Okay.
We'll see if this is what she was asking. So when you seam it, like right here, this edge, I think you were asking, like, you work all the way around. So you chain one to create the height for your stitches. You work all the way around, and then what happens, like the seam's right there, you just work in that last corner stitch, and then you would join it with a slip stitch here and kind of pull it together. So you would do a, show you.
Yeah, can you show that again? I know at least for me, your video sort of froze in a crucial part there.
Okay, so let's pretend we've done our half doubles all the way around. Okay. And then you just join it with a slip stitch. So you kind of just skip right over the seam. And you can see because my stitch marker was right there, it made it very easy to find where I'm joining. And then you chain one to bring up your height, and then you start moving along. Does that answer the question? Basically, there's not much to do. If you seamed it and pulled it together tight, you just kind of pass over it without realizing.
There we go. I think that clarifies it.
I thought that's what she meant. All right. So any other questions before we move on? So we're doing half double all the way around.
Susan wants to know, are we joining in the chain stitch when we join our rounds?
Yes. Let me rip this out. Okay, so let's look at the next bit we're going to have to do. So for the top of it, we're going to, you chain, this is having us chain two instead of chain one at the beginning. So sometimes with half double crochet, they'll instruct you to chain two or chain one. And it kind of depends on your individual tension. You might need to chain two to create that height. Usually I only chain one, and that works out for me. So you can see what works out for you. So you're going to chain two, you're going to half double crochet in the next stitch, and then you're going to half double crochet two together. And then you have an asterisk, which usually means you're going to repeat something. So you half double crochet in the next two stitches, and then you half double crochet two together, and you're going to repeat from the asterisk all the way around. So that means you just go back here and keep repeating it. You don't go to the beginning of the line, you just repeat from here. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So we're going to half double crochet in the next stitch. I'm on the wrong line. Make sure you stay on the right line. Half double crochet in the next two stitches, and then half double crochet two together. So let's see about that. Really not so hard. So I'll chain two this time since that's what the pattern wants us to do. So we half double crochet in the next two stitches. And now we're going to half double crochet two together. So we start out like normal. We go into that stitch, bring up a loop. We have three on our hook, yarn over for our half double, go through the next stitch, bring up a loop, yarn over, and then pull it through all, which can be a bit tricky. There. And now we've decreased by 1. And what you would continue doing, then you would do a half double and a half double and then half double 2 together. But I'm going to do a half double 2 together to demonstrate that again. So you yarn over for your half double, go through, bring up a loop, go through, bring up a loop.
Oh, Darren, stop there. How many loops are on your hook before you pull through all of them? That's always a good way that I like to check and make sure that I'm ready to actually finish off the decrease.
So yarn over, so that's 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pull it through. Okay, so yarn over, go through, bring it up, yarn over, through, bring it up, yarn over, and then pull it all the way. Which can be a bit of a trick to get it through there. All right. Any questions about that? And then you would continue around, and what that's doing is that's closing up the top of your hat. So instead of gathering it tight by taking the long tail through the top edge of the hat and pulling it tight, this gives us a cleaner finish. So the top of the hat looks more like this with this method. Whereas with the other hat, the top of the hat looks like that. So you can see the difference. You get extra bulk with the way we did it before, which is fine. Different style. And then with this one, it's a much smoother finish, more like a dome. It's nice and smooth. Any questions about that? Any questions about anything we covered today at all? I like to put a pom-pom. So I'm going to show you how to make a pom-pom. So this is a clover pom-pom maker. And I've already loaded the one side. So when you start it, you open it up like that. And you load your yarn all on one side. So that side's finished. And then you load your yarn on this side. Just kind of hold it when you get started. And you want to make sure also that you're winding it in these corners, in these very edges. And then you wind it all the way across. Get it up in the very edge. And you would do it a little bit neater than what I'm doing it because I'm just trying to do it fast because this is not exciting to watch, is it? All right, so I would load it completely full like that one because you want them to match. But since we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And then you want to take a sharp scissor. And cut through the layers of it. You kind of have to snip at it. There's a lot of yarn on there, so you can't really just do it in one. It's a little easier if you snip at it as you go. And I'll do the same on the other side. This side's messy because I was just trying to hurry to demonstrate. Okay. So now that you've got it like this, you're going to take the yarn and it goes through. So you can see it's just going through there. Now you want to tie this very tight because that's what's going to hold your pom-pom together. And I like to leave a fairly long tail like this. And then you just open it up. Open this up. Open this side up. And then this pulls apart. What have I done? I didn't quite get it all the way through. So I made a big mess of my pom-pom. I didn't quite pull it all the way through, so that was a bust. But anyway, normally it makes a very nice pom-pom. But I was just trying to hurry, so it didn't work. Probably have questions about that, right? Other than the pom-pom mess, so if you do it wrong, you end up with a big mess. So I just missed one of the edges messed up. So any questions about the crochet that we covered today?
Aw, everyone says, hey, you're only human. You can mess up a pom-pom once in a while.
I can do another one. It's really hard to see what you're doing when you're watching through the video camera, not your actual hands.
I bet, yes. Yeah. While everyone's still here, we've got a couple minutes till class ends. I want to remind everybody that this recording will be available tomorrow at michaels.com/classes. So you can watch the class and rewind and stop and pause as much as you need. If you want to, if you've been participating in the chat, you can download it by clicking that box with the 3 dots and then select Save Chat. Unfortunately, I think for Zoom, it will only show the chat from the point you joined it. So hopefully you've been in there to get all these tips. I am going to pop the patterns in there one more time in case you need to download them. I'm trying to talk and give Darren time to make this pom-pom. Okay, here we go.
So what happened the last time, which I've never had happen before, was I didn't cut all of it. I left one of these, couple of these strands I missed. And then when I tried it to secure it, it didn't secure it because it wouldn't let it go to the middle. Okay, so I'm gonna double check and make sure. So double check, we've all seen what happens if you don't do it right. Okay, so I've cut them all. This time I'm sure. And so you just load that through the center and then you pull it tight. You want to make sure it's very tight. And then you open it up. Hopefully it works. So you open it up. Like that. And it's going to look like this. And then you pull it apart, and then you end up with a pom-pom. And you can make a little sparse one like this, or I like mine to be nice and full. And then you just kind of shape it up. And the reason I like to leave a long tail like this is you can put this on a darning needle and put it through the top of your hat, put this side through and then this side through, and then tie a very tight bow in the middle. And then that way you can remove the pom-pom if you want to remove it, because if you want to wash the hat, you might not want to wash the pom-pom. Maybe it's not a pom-pom day for you, or maybe you want to put that pom-pom on a different hat. So that way you can just tie it in a very tight bow, and you can untie it whenever you need to change it if you want to. That's what I like to do. It's really easy. I can't believe that first one fell apart, but it happens. Any questions?
Everyone's very glad to see that you conquered the pom-pom again.
Conquered the pom-pom, yay.
Yes. Let's see, it does look like we are at our hour limit. So I'll just say again, this recording's going to be available at michaels.com/classes tomorrow. To save the chat, click on the 3 little dots and select Save Chat. I just put the patterns in there again, but they're also available on librarian.com if you search the pattern names. And we have some other classes coming up that Darren's going to be teaching. I know there was a little bit of confusion with this class name, and some people thought it was a beginning crochet class, so we're sorry about that. But we will be teaching some crochet beginner classes. We're going to have Crochet 101 coming up on October 5th, Crochet 102 coming up on October 12th, and Crochet 103 on October 19th. Those are 3 Mondays in a row. And I don't think they've got them listed on Michael's website yet, but they should be there soon, hopefully. So if you needed some more basic help, you can go back for those.
And also, if you have any questions going forward, you can send me a message on Instagram. Maybe Claire will put my Instagram in the chat. It's Mr. Woolly Bear, M-I-S-T-E-R spelled out. So if you find me on Instagram, you can send me a direct message and I'll be able to answer any questions you have at that point, hopefully. We'll see how it goes. Okay, anything else before we go?
I think we had one question about how to keep track of stitches, like how many stitches you have in a row or a round.
Oh. Let me see if I have something to. So when you count your stitches, maybe go back to the hand view. So when you count your stitches, what you're going to count is this. Like when you're going to do a crochet, you're going to go through there. I think that was my chain. Let me rip this back. So whenever you're going to do a crochet, you go right through there. So you can count these. It's a nice way to count your stitches. So if you count these, that'll give you the right number of stitches. Sometimes I'll count like the whole. You can go that way. How do you do it, Claire? Do you have a way?
Yeah, I count the V's like that. And I think if I was doing like a really long piece, I would want to put like stitch markers in like every 20 or 15 or whatever number makes sense to you.
Yeah. So also you want to find this post. That's really your crochet there. So you can count that, or I usually count these because I find that very easy to see. And that's where you're going to make your stitch anyway. You're going to go under both of those to make your stitch. So that's your stitch. So does that help?
Yeah. I think we'll take Jana's question as the last one for this class, which is one that I had trouble with when I started crocheting. Which is the first stitch of the row?
That's a controversial problem.
Well, not controversial, but there's 2 schools of thought, I feel like.
2 schools of thought. So sometimes the way I like to do it, and which way keeps me, the problem is you can add stitches or subtract stitches by mistake. So I find this V at the very beginning, and I've decided the way I'm going to live my life is that's my first stitch right there. And then as you're going across, you go through each one of these, and when you get to the end, you go through that last one that's a V. But sometimes, and it does give you a more straight edge, you can go through the second one, skip that first one. See, it's so close. They count this, that chain 2 to give you the height. They count that as your first half double. And so you don't go in there, you go in here. You skip the first one because your chain counts as the first one. And then when you get to the end, you have to, instead of going under this, you add one more stitch, you go into the chain. So what I recommend doing is when you're here, and you're chaining 1 or 2, depending on what you're doing, or 3 if you're doing triple. I put stitch, I love a stitch marker. Put a stitch marker there. Skip the first one. And then when you get to the end of your row, when you come back, pretend this is the end from the row before, you can see right there where you're gonna put your, you go through the chain instead. Does that help? But you have to pick one way to live, pick one way to live by and then stay with that for a while until you get really comfortable.
Yes, pick one and stick with it. You don't want to mix them up. Alrighty, I think we are all set. I just put the patterns in the chat one more time if you need to save them really quick. Unfortunately, they are only available as PDFs. We don't have them as Word documents or anything else, but you all should be able to use that. And hopefully we see you again soon.
Bye everyone, thanks for coming to class.